Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon at our Surrey Digital Town Hall. And of course, we are going to be very shortly joined by Canada's Infrastructure Minister, Catherine McKenna. Also at this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. I'd also like to thank the Port of Vancouver for their ongoing sponsorship of our Surrey Digital Town Hall series. The Port of Vancouver, they trade with over 170 different countries all over the world. They are Canada's largest port. And let me tell you that they are instrumental in ensuring that our supply chains locally, nationally, and globally are kept alive. Thank you so much to our frontline workers as well. And I believe the minister has just joined us. Thank you so much.
I have. Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get to you in just a moment.
Great.
I'd like to also indicate a huge shout out to our frontline workers at the Port of Vancouver, our truck drivers, our marine pilots, our terminal workers, our railroaders. Really, the economy for Canada could not survive without the Port of Vancouver. So thank you so much for your ongoing sponsorship. Just to let you know that this session is being recorded. The survey link will be sent to you after the session is over. I also wanted to let you know that we have a couple of questions set up for the minister, but any questions that you have, please indicate them in the chat function and we'll get to them. If we're not able to, we'll get to them after the session is over. I wanted to mention that the Surrey Board of Trade, I represent the Board of Trade sitting on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force for COVID-19, identifying ongoing gaps and opportunities for businesses during this time and also for economic recovery. I'm also part of the Surrey Economic Recovery Coalition, where we meet every Friday with the City of Surrey's emergency response team. Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia, and we want to make sure that we're also focusing on economic recovery at the local level, and also identifying gaps and opportunities for businesses. We have a direct line into the Prime Minister's office as well. And we're so pleased to also be able to identify gaps and opportunities for businesses, for the economy. So everyone, I thank you so much for attending this afternoon. And just to introduce Minister McKenna, in 2015, she was elected the first female Member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre and appointed Minister of Environment and Climate Change. In both roles, she has earned the reputation as a skilled negotiator and a tenacious community builder. Her existing portfolio in terms of infrastructure investments, in terms of communities, is so integral in terms of economic recovery for the whole nation, for our cities, our municipalities throughout Canada. So I'm so pleased she could join us here with the Surrey Board of Trade. And just a few remarks before we get into the questions. Minister McKenna, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Anita. And I'm delighted to join from Ottawa. Hopefully one day we'll all be meeting in person. And I don't know if I have any of my colleagues joining. Do I have any colleagues, Anita? I don't know if Randeep or Ken or others were going to join, but we have very great MPs representing Surrey, but more broadly in the broader Vancouver area. So look, this is a really critical time, and who could have imagined we'd be here even 3 months ago, that COVID-19 has really transformed all of our lives. I'm happy to talk about it some more, but one of the things that people don't always know is that I'm Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. And I think a lot of people think, and including in Surrey, I'm sure you think of bridges, you think of roads, like hard infrastructure, but the communities part of my title has actually meant a lot now, I think, to all of us as we think about how our worlds are much smaller right now, and how building better communities is maybe a different way of talking about infrastructure, but probably a way in recognizing how much the built environment really impacts us. So what have we been doing? I mean, obviously our government has been really focused on the COVID-19 health and economic response, the immediate response. It's extraordinarily challenging. I don't have to tell you folks that. Not only, you know, the issues in relation to health and addressing the health pandemic and making sure that we keep people and essential workers, seniors, everyone safe, but it's also the huge economic challenge. And that is really hard. I see it obviously as member of Parliament in Ottawa Centre, very locally in my small businesses, but we see it in businesses across the country. And I think the Prime Minister is right when he said, we've got your back. I mean, I think that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to support Canadians, Canadian workers, Canadian businesses to make sure that we can get through this. And at the end of this, that we get through it stronger. And I think we've seen, you know, there are some real challenges in our economy and in society where they've been laid bare. So I think that's something also that we need to reflect on, that as we, in my portfolio, you build things, are we building things that are better, that they're improving lives, that ensure that Canadians are healthy and safe, and that we have clean air and access to nature, and gosh, access to high-speed broadband. I've never seen anything. I have 3 children, and I can't even imagine if we weren't hooked up to the internet, how we would do school or how I would actually be able to do work. Because sometimes I'm like, okay, another Netflix show is fine. We've all probably done that. Hopefully I'm not the only parent who's done that. So, I mean, look, I could go through all of our programs. I won't go through all of our programs, but I'm sure you all see the Prime Minister every day announcing different programs to support Canadians and to support Canadian businesses. Okay, so infrastructure, that's obviously what I'm very focused on, thinking about infrastructure in our new reality. So I've done, like all of you, tons of Zoom calls and WebEx calls and Teams calls, and you know, and a million apps are now on my phone to be able to communicate with folks. I've talked to provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous leaders, business leaders, construction companies, transit authorities. And one, it's about how do we address the immediate pressures, but 2, how do we think about the longer term? And the infrastructure program that we have, it's a longer term program. It's a 10-year program, but we've been thinking about, and I've thought about, how do we tweak the program for the current circumstances? So we have a $33 billion infrastructure program with provinces and territories. Only half of that has been allocated. And that's the federal side of it. So that's $16 billion that would be matched by different matching arrangements, but with provinces and territories. And we should be making sure that we're using that money. So what 3 things that I've been really focused on with my team, my political team, but also the department. 1, getting faster approvals. So we have a lot of projects that have come forward that we have been focused on. How do we get the projects turned around as quickly as possible? We've approved hundreds of projects while everyone has been working kind of on the immediate response. We've been working on, okay, let's turn around these projects. Let's get the information that we need, because we need to get projects going. It means jobs. It means kickstarting the economy. It means better communities. And so we've been doing that. 2, we have looked at how do we create incentives for provinces to do projects that are shovel worthy, as I'm calling it, that will go ahead and be finished by the end of next construction season. So we've tweaked our program. We've created what we call a COVID-19 stream that creates an incentive for provinces to do smaller projects that can go ahead right away, that will create immediate jobs in a broad range of areas, some that we don't normally do. So we've expanded to include municipal and retrofits of municipal and provincial infrastructure. We have a massive infrastructure deficit. We can get those buildings in better shape, more energy efficient. We've included health facilities, so hospitals, but also repurposing facilities to respond to the pandemic and the need for social distancing, but also in some cases, the need to, for example, set up field hospitals in schools in different places. I think everyone now recognizes how important it is to get out in nature and be able to get around. So active transportation, infrastructure from cycling paths to pathways, very important. And then we're doing things that are easy to do, social distancing. So that's like tree planting, natural infrastructure, disaster mitigation, things that are important, but in their own right, but also that could go ahead. Last thing, more broadly in our infrastructure program, looking at areas that we've seen challenges. So healthcare, we've seen huge challenges, long-term care, huge challenges. And so looking at how do we support investments with provinces in areas that we might not normally do because they're provincial jurisdiction, but I think right now we just recognize we all need to be working together. And this is not stimulus. So I should be clear, a lot of people say, okay, what's your stimulus? I think we are still doing a lot of thinking about that. I know a lot of people have talked about a clean stimulus. Yes, definitely climate change is going to be extremely important, but I think there's some broader reflections. As I said, broadband. We need, from a productivity perspective, to have high-speed broadband way before 2030, which was the goal. But we also need it from an equity perspective. It is just unconscionable that some people cannot get access to broadband. And for businesses, I mean, they need to be able to have reliable high-speed broadband. So I think that there are broader reflections that we need to take and consider, including the economic situation, and really figure out if we are going to invest more dollars, how do we get maximum value? I am Irish, and Irish, you always think of Scottish being tight with money. Irish are tight with money too. I do not want to be spending any money that we're not going to get great returns on, both in the short term with jobs, but of course, but also in the longer term in positioning our economy for the future. So there's, I mean, I could talk about Burnaby. I don't know why I said Burnaby, Surrey, that we have invested in a lot of projects that are important, from the Surrey coastal flood adaptation strategy, low carbon thermal energy study that looks at the impacts of climate change, the expansion, phase 2 expansion of the Surrey Museum, the Cloverdale Athletic Park. And we're going to continue to do that because these are really important local projects that create good jobs, but also improve lives in the community. And we have a huge opportunity in terms of our investments in infrastructure in British Columbia, working directly with the government of BC, with municipalities, and also businesses. The last thing I'll say, because I know you want to ask questions, we also have the Canada Infrastructure Bank. So I often get questions, what is this bank? It's actually, in some ways, a misnomer. It's a financing mechanism. What it's intended to do is government doesn't have infinite dollars. And so we need to crowd in private sector funding for some initiatives. Not every project will be suitable for private sector investment, but wherever we can, we need to be smart about leveraging those dollars because we can build more. And there are basically infinite infrastructure needs. I hear from provinces, municipalities all the time. And so I think we need to look at creative financing models. I think the bank is, you're going to see, it's going to play a significant role in the recovery process. We have a new chair, Michael Sabia. If you don't know him, he was head of the Caisse de dépôt in Quebec. He's done major infrastructure projects, and I think he's going to serve us very well because I think there's opportunities for the bank to invest in transit systems, to invest in renewable energy, to invest in broadband, and really support projects that are going to have a long-term impact, very significant projects, electrification projects, including in BC, that I think will really position us well. And I think we will get out of this. My last thing is we will get out of this. It may feel like every day you just try to get through the day, but what we need to do is get out of this stronger in a way that we are more resilient, that we're positioned for the future, and also that we've really focused on how do we improve lives, how do we improve our productivity and create jobs. So that is, that's it. Now, Anita, happy to take questions for your folks.
Thank you so much, Minister. And absolutely, you know, while we're dealing with the pandemic and navigating, being that concierge of connections, it's a time for innovation as well. For the business community and for all levels of government too, not only from a technology perspective, but to look at all of our processes. I wanted to ask you more specifically, you mentioned transit systems.
Mhm.
We at the Surrey Board of Trade consider transportation to be one of the economic foundations, in addition to education, to driving an economy. So what is your perspective about supporting transit agencies that are suffering in terms of operational funds?
So this is really important. So obviously we are investing in very large public transit projects. I know that that Surrey has a large piece of a broader Vancouver transit system. I think that's incredibly important. But I mean, obviously there's a short-term crunch right now. It's extremely hard for transit authorities. We've heard from them. They've had to lay people off. And so I've done a lot of thinking about that. My department has done some work. I think I'll just be perfectly frank. The reality is we do need to be working with the province on this because cities are creatures of provinces, and provinces have been very clear to us about that. But now I think it's really important that both levels of government work with the municipalities, because the last thing we want is for less people to take public transit because there's less transit available. We actually need more transit now because people have to socially distance so they can feel safe. So this is something that we are working on. Stay tuned. But my message to you may be a message that you should pass on also, to the province, that we all need to be working together. That the significance, the needs are significant. I mean, we've heard $10 billion overall for municipalities. On the transit side, it's important. And I think that we do need to find a solution.
And absolutely, on our call with the Premier last week, as
That's right.
part of the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force, Premier Horgan did say he wants to work with you. And I wanted you to pass that message on to you as well, especially as it relates to TransLink. Because by 2050, we have another 1.3, 1.4 million people moving to Metro Vancouver. Many of them will be moving to the South Fraser Economic Region, where we want to create an environment, a livability environment where people can live, learn, work, and play. And they don't have to spend a lot of time in traffic and in congestion. Yeah. And I know that's important to you, Minister, as well, especially as it relates to your previous portfolio too.
You're right. I mean, so I do. So people sort of say to me, "Well, you must be sad you're not working on climate change." But I am now. We're still working on climate change, but I have money, so it's even better. And obviously, transportation. It's a climate issue because it's cleaner public transportation, but it's also how to get people around faster, more cheaply, and that is critical for communities like Surrey.
I just wanted to remind the audience to put your questions in the chat function. But I'll continue on with my questions. Tell me about your perspective, Minister, about port infrastructure investments and free trade agreements. July 1st is the new NAFTA agreement. We have other free trade agreements. Can our ports across the nation handle that additional capacity? Your perspective.
It's interesting. A lot of people don't know that my background, I'm a trade lawyer. So I practiced law in Indonesia, and then I practiced with a big Bay Street firm doing trade law. And I just think trade is critical. And you guys know that. It's obviously hard. We now see the challenges with the supply chain. So I think there's some reflections that I think some things we do probably need to be manufacturing some critical things here from, it's just a national security and health perspective. But look, I think the ports across Canada play huge roles in bringing in goods. And one of the areas of focus of my portfolio is trade corridors. How do we facilitate the movement of goods between countries? How do we make sure that, that we have facilities that work well, that we are able to attract investment, and that really we can make sure that the huge trade of goods that we have, and particularly with the United States, but in BC, it's a lot of into Asia. I lived in Asia, so I certainly know that we're really well positioned. We're very fortunate in Canada. We have the longest coastline in the world. We have 3 oceans, that we really need to take advantage of that and make the investments that are needed. And I think you've seen us do that, but I think there are other opportunities.
I don't know if you can speak to this or not. Today we released a paper around our support for the federal government around a global vaccine fund. But in and amongst that, we wanted to ensure an accessible, efficient vaccine infrastructure so that no one is left out. Have those conversations around vaccine infrastructure, distribution, perhaps even with the Ministry of Health, has that been top of mind for the federal?
Uh, well, certainly, I mean, there's so much that's top of mind right now, but of course, from a health perspective, we all know we're not out of this until we get a vaccine. That's just the reality. We're going to be living in like this in different ways. But until we have a vaccine, people are not safe. And so we are working very hard on that. We've been working hard internationally to coordinate with partners. I'm happy to take this forward to the Minister of Health, Patty Hadju, because I think she thinks really hard about this. And we've already seen some real advances in Canada. We have some amazing scientists and researchers that are doing really good work in this regard. And we're collaborating with other countries, which I think is key, because we want to make sure that we actually get access to the vaccine, because it is a race right now. I will tell you, for PPE, for personal protective equipment, obviously for a vaccine, all of that. Everyone is working, trying to secure their sources, and we want to make sure that certainly we have access to a vaccine, and I think we have a lot to contribute. But I'm happy. I haven't had a chance to read your paper, but I'll check it out and make sure I get it to the health minister.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You mentioned broadband infrastructure. And during COVID-19, like even in Surrey, people have challenges. They don't have internet connectivity. What's been really challenging is that the Service Canada locations have remained closed, the actual offices. So some people don't have access to internet or even a phone. But do you know when Service Canada offices will be opened up?
Well, I don't know that, but I do. So first of all, I'll totally acknowledge how challenging it is. And often people think about, if you're in a city where you have really good access to high-speed broadband, you don't realize that sometimes it's just right outside the city that you don't have proper access. And that is just a huge challenge. I mean, put aside COVID, even if we didn't have that, in terms of being competitive in the 21st century, you need high-speed broadband access for everyone. So I know, I mean, obviously with respect to Service Canada, I mean, there's been, the focus is on keeping people safe, workers safe and at home. So I don't know when the plan is to reopen. I know that they have many services online, but I guess you're saying that people having access, that might not otherwise have access, having access through Service Canada. I don't know. So that is something though, I can find that out, but in the longer term, I will tell you, I'm pushing extremely hard internally. I think this is critically important that you can make a business case for making a huge investment in making sure that everyone has high-speed broadband, because the cost of not having it is huge. And we've actually seen, sometimes you need a crisis for things to change quickly. So we had talked a lot about video health. We now are actually doing it. There were all these reasons why it was really challenging, security issues, and now you're seeing a lot of video health. And that is incredible, because that'll transform how we deliver health services. And a lot of people don't have access to a doctor. But now if you can do it by video, you can support people in cities who don't have access to a doctor. And gosh, if you live in a remote community, you can have access. And I think that, like even Zoom, I think it's shown probably to all of us business travelers that maybe we don't need to get on a plane so often. And I guess that many people may not, for a while, will be a bit nervous about getting on planes. So I think that there are a lot of reflections as a result of this crisis. Some, it's extremely challenging, but some of them, I think, point out that there are different ways that we can do things that are better. And I think that's where we need to be making sure that we're paying attention to that as we invest in the future that we want.
And I just did also want to preface that since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been fielding calls from businesses, from workers as well, because it's about business people and community at the Surrey Board of Trade.
Yeah.
The Service Canada locations should be open. So if that is a message you can take back to the relevant staff, we would sincerely appreciate that.
I now see, Anita, I've now figured out how to do this because I'm obviously a bit slow, but I see a lot of questions now. What? Looks like you got very engaged community here.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. And one of those pieces is around preparing for the future. And I'm just wondering if you have any knowledge about the need to prioritize the much needed expansion of Highway 1 beyond 264th Street into the Fraser Valley all the way to Abbotsford. We sit on the board of the Abbotsford International Airport, and we absolutely need that as a connector, as a region-wide effort, not only in Fraser Valley, but all throughout Metro Vancouver. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just be frank because I think it's always better to be upfront. I mean, we fund highways, but it's really through our rural and northern stream, which BC has access to. Our focus, there are funds through transport, it's not really through my department, because my department is really focused public transportation, green infrastructure. There's a rural and northern component. There's a broadband component, and then there is a community and rec center component. So, but I hear you, as you say, you've got to be able to get in and out, including to the airport, to get people around. So, something I can pass on. And I'm sure you have very able MPs. That is one thing I will tell you. You have very good MPs who are out there. They make sure that they get the messages through.
Yes, and we're very well connected with them as well. What about your perspective on the future of electric vehicle charging infrastructure projects?
So we have significant investments already in electric vehicle charging infrastructure it's through Natural Resources Canada. But we have a green infrastructure stream through our infrastructure program with provinces, so they can always do projects that fit within green infrastructure, which would include charging infrastructure. So that's a top priority, because I now have an electric vehicle. It's great, but obviously the biggest thing you worry about is, will I be able to charge? And I think there's huge opportunities with electric buses. We've committed to 5,000 electric buses across Canada. There are other opportunities. We need to electrify everything, but we need to make it as easy as possible. I realize that unless you create something as an irresistible option, like public transit, you got to make it so it's really good. If you want people to buy an electric vehicle, you need to make sure that they know they can charge. So that is a top priority, and that is something we do fund.
Minister, I mentioned that in addition to transportation, education is also an economic foundation, a principle for the Surrey Board of Trade in terms of driving the economy. Do you consider current shovel-ready projects, are they restricted only to provinces and municipalities? Can the education sector also apply?
Well, so what we did is, as I said, we broadened our infrastructure program so that it would include schools, hospitals, emergency response facilities. But you do need to be working with your province and municipality. The lists we get, because these arrangements are bilateral agreements with provinces, we get projects from the province. So these are projects, whoever it's brought forward by, if it was a school, hospital, municipality, they're brought forward to the province, and the provinces bring the projects to us. So, but we have broadened it, as I've said. So we've made it so that things that we would normally fund, schools, hospitals, paramedic facilities, the things that would normally, even affordable housing, we're now doing. We do affordable housing through other streams, but through our stream, but it is definitely, the relationship is with the province. So because we feel that the province is best placed working with the local partners to decide what infrastructure makes sense.
Minister, thank you so much. When can we expect to see a national active transportation strategy rolled out?
Oh, well, I saw someone wrote that question. So they noted that Andy Fillmore, I don't know if everyone knows who Andy Fillmore is, but Andy Fillmore is my amazing parliamentary secretary. He's also a city planner. He was with the city of Halifax. He's a real cities guy, and he understands the importance of active transportation. So I've actually tasked him to develop our active transportation strategy. The interesting thing is that in my 4 years as Minister of Environment and Climate Change, I was trying to do it, but I didn't have the portfolio. So now I have the portfolio. So I think, like, look, when we build public transit, we need to be thinking about how do you even get there. So I'll give you the example of Ottawa. In Ottawa, 80% of Ottawans will live within 5 kilometers of LRT. Well, how are they going to get those 5 kilometers? And I think we need to be smarter about that. Active transportation has a huge role to play. I know a lot of people like cycling I'm sure Surrey, the broader Vancouver area. And I think it's low hanging fruit. It's also good for you. And now I saw someone tweeting, I have some haters who tweet at me, but I also have amazing people. And they were talking about the opportunities now that you have electric bikes. Because electric bikes, if you've never tried one, the new models are amazing. And what they do is you get that little oomph. So you can be still riding your bike, but then you can put it on, and so you can go further. So even if you're not a big cyclist, if you've got to go 5 kilometers, it's not gonna, it can get you there really easily and quickly. And so I think there are new modes of transportation. He's working on that. He's going to be coming out with it. We have made significant investments already in cycling infrastructure, but I don't think we've brought coherence to a active transportation. It's not just cycling, it's any active way of getting around, walking, rollerblading, I don't know, cartwheels, whatever you like. But anyway, we're putting that strategy together right now.
Minister, part of your portfolio is around community. And I wanted to get your perspective on the tourism and hospitality sector. Our hotels have been hit hard, our convention centers, tourism, our borders are closed. Surrey is a border city. What's your perspective on that?
Well, so I've had really good conversations with with Minister Joly. So Minister Joly, I don't know if she's spoken to the Surrey Board of Trade. I'm sure she has. This is her passion. She is working extremely hard. It has been very tough. Hotels being closed, restaurants being hit, tourist operators. And I think that's a sector we really are going to support because it's a huge competitive advantage for Canada. People love Canada. They love coming to Canada. They love visiting Canada. They love our nature. They love our cultural institutions. But it's going to be hard just until we figure out a vaccine, getting people coming into our country, even the border is going to be a challenge. And I know BC is very concerned about having people come in from the US that'll, extend the pandemic, the health situation in BC. But we'll recover. And this is a huge source of jobs. So we need to be making sure that we support it through this very challenging time. And I think that there's a huge opportunity with local tourism. I don't know if anyone follows Jacinda Ardern. I'm a big fan of her. She's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And she was talking about, okay, everyone go travel locally. And I think that's an opportunity. I mean, we all have to be supporting our local businesses during this time. And it's a good time, staycations, go check out things, get out there. But it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for the near future, but it's a critical sector to our economy. It's hugely important. It's a huge part of our economy, and so we needed to recover, and we're just going to have to help work with it through this time.
Can you speak to the fact of, where we're so appreciative, business is so appreciative of the federal government's support to businesses? And but there's been a lot of money that's been spent, and what do you think about the future is in terms of reducing the deficit? What will that mean to businesses and actually communities?
Well, I mean, look, I'm someone who cares greatly about the economy, but imagine if we didn't step up and support businesses. I mean, look, I actually am a fiscal conservative, might surprise people. I don't think that you should be very careful with taxpayer dollars. But gosh, if there's a time where the federal government needs to step up, and we're very lucky, we have very good books, we have the fiscal capacity to do it. We need to be supporting businesses, because what kind of economy will we have if we have no businesses at the end of it? Sure, at the end of this, we're going to have to figure it out. We are a long way off from that. And that doesn't mean you just go spend money foolishly. I think what you do is you support Canadians, you support Canadian businesses. And I think we're going to have to see what the recovery is like. There are if you you can get 5 economists and get 5 different opinions on how quick the recovery is, what it's going to look like, what sectors are going to recover. I think our immediate focus is the right focus. The only way to get out of this is to deal with the health crisis first, and support everyone through it. And then I think we will need to see what we need to do to kickstart our economy. Infrastructure, no doubt, will be a part of it, which is why we're working on approving projects quickly, because there are good jobs there. And also supports Canadian businesses in the construction sector and our supply chain. But in the end, we're going to have to, of course, look at the books after this. But as I say, I mean, I do not agree with those who would say this is the time for restraint. I don't know how we are going to survive this. And gosh, if we don't support, you talked about the tourism sector, if we don't support our hotels, we don't support our tourist operators, we don't support our restaurants, if we don't support our small businesses, or, support our bigger businesses, how are we ever going to get out of this? And that's what I worry most about on the economic side. And then we're going to have to chart our course for the future. And I think when we make investments, though, you can be sure, certainly on the infrastructure side, we will not be making investments that won't have double, triple returns on the investment. So that means jobs, but also that returns, for example, in terms of the environment, social returns. We have to be thinking about how do we spend our money wisely.
One of the key things that we're always on about and is about red tape reduction, the regulation related to that. How are you, or is your government, improving infrastructure project procurement and approval processes to achieve more faster approval, including reasonable requirements for contracts and bidders? Current procurement processes layer on extra costs, and so they delay project approval. We're trying to create jobs, instigate the economy. What's your perspective on that?
So, I think that's really important. And I've really focused on, we need to get projects approved. And I'm a details person. So I actually look into why is it taking longer? What can we do? We've got very tight service standards, 60 days for a project, a regular project. So that is really fast, actually. But the new COVID stream will be much faster. It'll be 2 weeks turnaround. The focus is really what are projects, smaller projects can go ahead quickly and create jobs. We need jobs this construction season. And overall, I'm reviewing our program and looking at where are there areas where we could be more efficient while not sacrificing on doing things right. And we need to be careful because there have been challenges with infrastructure programs and supporting projects that shouldn't be supported. So I am someone who cares greatly about how we spend taxpayer dollars and making sure we get the benefit. But I agree that we need to be making sure that we're getting projects approved quickly, working with provinces, working with municipalities. So top priority, we've actually approved during this period hundreds of projects, the majority of projects that we had sitting on our desk from BC, which I think is really important. And you will see them going ahead, many of them this construction season, which I think is great.
You mentioned just recently that you've been watching the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And one of the questions from our audience is, what are your comments about her concept on a 4-day work week?
Well, look, I think, you know what, all bets are off now. I think that we need, one of the things that will hurt us the most if we can't think creatively. That doesn't mean every idea you go with, but I think we have to push the envelope. Her rationale for a 4-day work week is that you could employ more people if you had 4 days. She's not forcing it on anyone, so I should be clear. And I don't know all the details of her policy, but she has said, look, we should have more people having jobs rather than less, and maybe people could take an extra day and go, travel somewhere and spend some of their money on tourism, on domestic tourism, because they're not going to have anyone visiting New Zealand. And I think that's the spirit we need. I know people have talked about, do we need a guaranteed annual income? I think these are discussions that we need to have, because in some ways, a lot of these things would save us money. They would make maybe more effective programs. And also, I think we actually realize now that, in getting back to my title as Minister of Communities, that the communities we live in matter. It's not just having bridges and roads for the sake of having bridges and roads. It's actually having stronger communities. It's having communities that you want to live in. It's having communities where people have access to good healthcare and good schools and access to nature. And so I think, and there's a huge value in all of those things. So I think, look, this is the time for reflection. I could pull up all my books. I've got all these books on FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, during the Great Depression. He brought in huge changes that had massive benefits. It's a very, very different time. But if you go to Washington or you go across the US, he did massive public works projects that created jobs for all these people who had lost hope of ever having a job. He employed artists, so you see beautiful artwork in these buildings, and institutions that have lasted for, such a long time. And I think, look, we got to be creative. We have to be bold. Sometimes in Canada, I think we have to be more ambitious. And we also have to be smart. And so I'm all for, let's have good discussions about new ideas. And I think, look, there are things that aren't working. Our facilities for seniors. I mean, I think we've got some major reflections. We're seeing, in particular in Ontario, we've heard about just today about how challenging the situation is and how the conditions are unacceptable. So I think we can always do better. I'm a progressive. I think progress is possible. But I do love Jacinda Ardern. You know what? She's a young female politician, and I met her once. My one story about meeting Jacinda Ardern, it was when we were in New York at the UN. It was for climate negotiations, and there she was with her partner, carrying her baby in the baby seat that you put in the car. I've done that many times, and I was like, just like us. She was low key and plain talking, and she has huge confidence of the citizens of New Zealand. And I think that's a great example of a politician who's listening.
What about your perspective on, following your comments on FDR, your thoughts on a so-called Green New Deal and how it would relate to cleaner infrastructure and shovel-worthy projects that create jobs?
Well, look, I think in this day and age, I mean, if you don't think about the environment, you're not thinking about the economy. The economy of the future is already very different. And we've seen the challenges for our oil and gas sector that are related to price. And I think we have the opportunity. We're very smart Canadians. We have access to, minerals that we need for the economy of the future. It's a transition. It's not going to happen overnight. But we have to position ourselves. It's always making sure that you're looking at where the puck is going. And that's what we got to be doing. And the good news is, you look at British Columbia, it's a leader when it comes to clean tech. It's got LNG, which the world needs. It is really focused on electrification. And I think those are the opportunities. And the world is changing very quickly. And we've got to change with it. And we've got to position ourselves well. And so that is definitely part of our thinking, that when we think about what do we want to do, we definitely want to be thinking about how do we invest in clean technologies that create jobs, that create growth, that create solutions that the world needs. How do we invest in renewables? Electric buses, huge opportunity in British Columbia with electric buses, and actually they're made in Canada. The Lion bus is in Quebec, and New Flyer buses out of Manitoba. That you look at buildings, we can do massive retrofit programs and people can save money because you'll use less energy. So I think there's a huge business case, and that's something that we're certainly thinking about. And BC is a great partner because people in BC get it.
I wanted to ask you, and you may or may not have a perspective on this. Of course, most of the jobs that have been lost are in the tourism, the retail, the restaurant sector, not in the construction sector, although Surrey in itself has had a thriving construction development sector. Do you know about any training plans that are in place to allow for retraining? Does your funding process allow for that?
So we do have programs that are for retraining, but I think this is going to be really important. So this is why, you know, it's good to read about FDR. It's good. I've talked to a lot of the Obama folks from 2008 and 2009 and what they did to help with the recovery. But this is a very different crisis. And we're also at a very different point in time where people are going to have a number of different jobs. And I think that education is key. We know that if you have post-secondary education, you are going to be significantly better positioned. And so I think we need to be supporting Canadian workers, whether you're someone who is more senior, who, you know, we need to think about what are the opportunities there, or you're a young person just starting out in your career where you're going to continuously have to get new skills. And so that's a focus, and we've been talking about that. So getting back to this isn't like, you know, a 2008-9 recession. I think it's not just infrastructure, and it's kind of against my own interest because I'm the Minister of Infrastructure, but we need to be investing in people. I think that's really important. I think we need to look at social infrastructure, which we haven't thought necessarily a lot about. So these are all the reflections that are very important. But I do think, like, look, Canada is well positioned when it comes to its tourism sector. We're a beautiful country with wide open spaces, with clean air and clean water and gorgeous mountains. All I can dream of is getting to BC sometime soon. I love BC. And so we'll get there. But we do need to make sure that we are supporting our population, especially because the future work looks very different.
Well, British Columbia is considered the Hawaii of Canada, so absolutely, I concur with you there. My final question to you is about, you mentioned a $10 billion COVID stream of funding. Some people have found the application process to be somewhat confusing. Is it available? When will those funds roll out? What's your perspective, the timeline on that?
So I should be clear. It's actually it's a 10% of the infrastructure program. So it's just intended to focus on, as I say, projects that could go ahead quickly. We're working with provinces and territories, so we're not in a position yet to announce it, but it'll be ready shortly. And then it's really up to provinces to determine, as I say, they're the lead on this, how they want to administer the programs. And we've made it very broad. So this stream could cover anything from municipal to provincial buildings, to active transportation, to health or school, hospitals or schools. So stay tuned. I know everyone's very anxious, but we are working hard on that.
Sorry, I do have one more question from the audience. Sure. I think it's really important because you said we have to have shovel-worthy projects. But in order to identify that, we need to ensure we have the right planning in place. So is there funding for the planning of infrastructure, perhaps with a focus on trade corridors?
So, I mean, I think there are projects that are, so shovel-worthy, what does that mean? People ask me that. Shovel-worthy means projects, you're not just like doing a project for the sake of doing a project, but they're actually projects that are good projects in their own right. So they could be projects that have an environmental benefit, or as we talked about, healthcare, schools, and projects that can go ahead quickly. So that's why with the COVID stream, we've tried to identify projects where you don't necessarily need a huge lead time, where you might not have massive planning. So if you're doing retrofitting of a building, you wouldn't have massive planning. If you're doing tree planting, and I know, so for example, in British Columbia, there's been a lot of interest in the community and rec stream. It's over a community and recreation center stream. It's been oversubscribed. So I know municipalities, we've heard from them. They have projects that are ready to go that they've already been working on. So it's really looking at what is the low hanging fruit. But in terms of planning, I think planning is important, and we've heard that feedback that it would be good if we could help support planning. Now, you don't want to get into the position where there have been cases where you plan and plan and plan and plan and plan and plan, like you do want at the end of that to get a project. But we are looking at that, including as we go forward in our programming. So once again, also stay tuned. We haven't had a budget yet. We haven't, done a stimulus piece, but I think recognizing that some, especially bigger projects, will require some front end investment to make sure, that you do it right, that they're viable, and that you bring all the pieces together. I've never known so much about planning now. I realize that you can't just whip up a project. So, so I hear you on that.
Well, Minister, I'd like to thank you so much for joining the Surrey Board of Trade, where Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia. Surrey is an opportunity city with a very diverse industry base. We absolutely need transportation investments, the right transportation investments to connect us within our city and also within our region as well. Any final words from you?
Well, look, we're just a partner. I am focused on really how do we support cities like Surrey? How do we build better? How do we improve lives? And as you say, transportation is such a critical element. It's not just how you get around, it's whether you can get home to your kids' basketball game. It's whether, you know, and right now it's whether you can do that safely. It's whether you're not sitting in the car getting, you know, on the horn, getting agitated. It's about cleaner air. So all of these are our top priorities, and working very closely with Surrey, with the province of BC is a top priority. So certainly think hard about, you know, the projects. You have very good MPs, as I say. My colleagues often are talking to me about opportunities there. So looking forward to continue working together. And a huge thanks to everyone. And who would have imagined, like, I didn't even know what Zoom was in January. And now here we are doing a Zoom call with very nice comments. Thank you to everyone who's thanking me. Thank you. You guys are great.
Thank you so much, Minister McKenna. And thank you everyone for joining us at the Surrey Board of Trade at our Surrey Digital Town Hall. Visit our Surrey Pandemic Business Center at www.businessinsurrey.com. The Surrey Board of Trade is here for you to help you. And remember, Surrey is an opportunity city.